In the Science of Mind magazine in 1992, the month of May, there was an Ernest Holmes quote that was shared that I found very interesting. And it said, "Our religious outlook is a universal one, there in its concept and inclusion. The infinite is all embracing. We work in harmony with all religious beliefs, since each in his own way seeks the ultimate cause, God the Father which art in heaven. The one who understands the science of mind will be tolerant, kind, and empathetic." If the measure of our understanding of this teaching is our ability to be tolerant, kind, and empathetic, how do you fare? I don't know about you, but I'm constantly being called to a deeper understanding of oneness and universality, if that's the measuring stick: tolerant, kind, and empathetic. So let's talk about this today. Our theme for the month is all about diversity, and it's in the face of diversity that we often can find ourselves being the most intolerant, unkind, and unempathetic. We get a lot of societal messaging and that we grow up with, but also exists right here today. And through that messaging, we're not always encouraged to be our best selves. There's a lot of room for us to express a lower vibration than our best. And that's why I believe coming together is so important, because here on a weekly basis, we're reminded of oneness and our experiences that reflect that, and our inherent nature of love, and we show up and learn to be tolerant, kind, and empathetic. The truth is that on the human level, our magic suits look really different than each other. The human truth is that we show up in different personality types, different preferences, different ways of solving problems, different ways of expressing our unique wounds and our growing edges. We have different weaknesses and we have different strengths. And we use our connection with the divine and our religious or spiritual inclinations in different ways. The bottom line is, we're all learning universal lessons, but we're learning them in unique ways. And it's so tempting when someone is learning their lessons and what they need to learn in a way that we find reprehensible or personally unrelatable. It's tempting to stand back and, I'm not sure what's going on with the sound. It's tempting to stand back and be judgy, right? No, it's buzzed. It's easy to fall into conversation with others. So when we get all judgy, about how someone else is doing things, it's easy to fall into conversations with others about what someone else is doing, how they're experiencing, how they're learning, how they should be doing it differently. It's easy to point out someone else's mistakes and missteps. Well, I certainly would have never done that. How could he have not seen that coming? Or, now is not time for this kind of stupidity, right? What was she thinking? What was in their consciousness? That's always a good one. And it's so tempting to join in that kind of conversation, because somehow it makes us feel a little bit better about ourselves, doesn't it, right? See, once we've learned something, once we've mastered a concept, it's easy to point out that someone else hasn't quite figured that out yet. Or on the flip side, it's easier to recognize our own growing edge, our own frailty, when it shows up in someone else's behavior. There's that old saying, if you spot it, you got it. Right? We can recognize ourselves in other people's experiences. But our jobs as spiritual beings, our jobs is to look beyond the human stuff and see the divine purpose of all of our seeming human differences. We've got to look through that to see the spiritual truth. If we stay focused on the human level, we're always going to experience this chasm of separateness, and it often seems impossible and too challenging to cross that chasm. I'm so different from that person. And day after day and year after year, and relationship after relationships, those differences being in our faces can wear us down. They can cause us to close our hearts, close our minds, and resign ourselves to the idea that I'm never going to be understood and I really don't understand other people. Our human hearts are flexible until they're not. Our mental constructs can get worn down by betrayals and disappointments and confusing experiences, and the world around us can begin to seem hostile and divisive. And when we project our own intolerance onto other people, when we start sending out intolerance, our own lives become more and more increasingly intolerable. But when we are ready and not one moment before, we can begin to shift our perspective to a spiritual one and train our minds and hearts to look with a different eye at the world and the people around us. And that's what we're here for this morning and every morning, because when we free other people from the prison of our judgment and weariness and fear, we actually free ourselves. Holmes says this: if our human relations are to mean the most to us, we must sense that there is a hidden around and through each of us a divine presence manifesting itself in infinite variations. The same impulse, the same love and life, but never quite alike in two persons. Holmes is calling out that sense of oneness, no matter how different we are. It's the same life and love that's breathing each and every person. And eventually, we can heal our connections to the world. And within us will rise this tolerance, this kindness, this empathy. That's what Holmes spoke of. When we understand the teaching, the truth of oneness, we will rise into tolerance, kindness, and empathy. And eventually, our goal becomes to look long enough at another person until we can see ourselves in them. I say that every person is a mirror, and we look at ourselves in all of these different mirrors. We gaze at our own minds and our own hearts in the presence of another. I want you to stare at everyone you meet. Well, that's kind of creepy. But look at everyone you meet. Gaze steadfastly until you can feel tolerance and kindness and empathy. Don't look away. Because when you can get there, you're going to feel a sense of peace. You know, I said last week that if we can stare into the darkness long enough, we can see the light. Look at a person long enough until you've watched their light come forth in them. It's there. It's there. One of my professors, Tom Sanger, said this: what is the key to living peace? Inclusiveness. To bring everyone into the love and life of God. To see all as sacred and individualized expressions of the divine. Accept all with unconditional love. Invite and exclude no one. See, what I believe is that each of us have a circle. We have a circle around us. And inside that circle is everyone that we can love and accept. And outside that circle lies those whom we just cannot quite draw in to our acceptance, into our circle of love. And it's all about relatability. When we can see ourselves in another person, we can bring them into our circle. As long as we see them as other, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to bring them in. Thankfully, throughout our lives, most of us keep opening the circle to include more and more and more people. And we do that work through exposing ourselves to the oneness that is inherent in other people. And many of us are doing that really purposefully, and many of us do it through travel. Okay, so when we travel to other cities, to other countries and continents, what we discover that everyone is the same wherever they are. Everyone is doing the best they can do to stay alive, to find a measure of happiness, to grow their understanding of how life works and what their place in life really is. Everyone is doing whatever it is that they do to make themselves feel purposeful and that their lives matter somehow. And we know that how others define those concepts can be very, very, very different than the way we define them. But we can recognize that below the surface, they all bleed red. They all want their children to grow up and be good. They want God, or whatever they call the divine, to approve and bless their lives. And they all want resources, the resources necessary to have a life that works for them. And as we travel, this abstract notion of a group of people that are somehow different than us begins to fade away, because we face the reality and witness that we are them. As we meet a wider and wider variety of people, of human lives, and we draw them in as relatable, we train our eyes spiritually. Oh, they might have a different understanding of God than I do, but I get it. They may live economically very differently than I do, but I see them. They may dress differently, eat differently, speak differently, pray differently, but they are quite like me. They are me. So I encourage you to travel. If you can't travel physically, watch documentaries. Get relatable to as many different kinds of people as you can. Expand your circle of acceptability. Expand your experience of tolerance and kindness and empathy. So I want to share a story that starts with a dream. Dreams are weird. I just acknowledge it's weird. But the dream was this. The city was deserted. The streets were empty and the buildings were abandoned. Some of them were even all boarded up, and some of them have been kind of blown away. There were only a dozen or so of us left. And we had all gathered in one of the lounges of an upper floor of a vacant hotel to watch the surreal scene that was unfolding before us. In the dream, the world was at war. All was darkness, except for the flashes of artillery and explosions of bombs that lit up the countryside. And we stood there and we watched what was happening around us in disbelief. The lights in the hotel flickered on. Finally, someone had figured out how to work the generator, and we were so excited because with the power on, we could finally open the sliding doors of the hotel, the exterior of the building. And several of us opted to go out into the streets to see if there were any in need of our assistance, or were there any more of us out there in the chaos. So I searched street after street, but I saw no one. The stillness in the whole place was eerie because it was usually bustling with people and business, and it just, the stillness was so big. So I decided to return to the hotel where everyone had gathered. And when I was a few blocks away from the hotel, I heard a faint cry. And I turned to look behind me, and I saw this little small figure frantically waving at some distance down the street. And I just groaned inwardly because I recognized the figure. It was Hanuman, a monkey that was familiar to me. That pesky monkey drove me crazy. When he was around, he chattered unceasingly. It was impossible to even think when Hanuman was around. He always wanted something and would drive people to distraction until he got it. He wasn't mean or bad, he was just a pest. I cringed to imagine being confined to a building in all this chaos with Hanuman in it. So I pretended to not hear him, and I continued on toward the building. And behind me, I could hear him crying out over and over. And I peeked cautiously behind me, and he just called out again, and he's waving. He was trying to catch up, trying to get my attention to make me slow down. But instead, I hurried into the building, again pretending that I hadn't heard him or seen him. And I went through the double doors into the building. Hanuman was right close behind me, and as he reached the doors, they had just closed in front of him. I was safely inside with the other people who had returned from their searches too. And I seemed to be the only one who could see Hanuman or hear him. So I looked back at the doors, and my heart nearly broke. Hanuman was there with his hands on the glass, sliding to the ground. He was shaking and crying out uncontrollably. I just couldn't bear to see him like that. So I asked one of the others there if they could please open the door. And as the doors began to pull apart, Hanuman looked at me with teary eyes, full of thanks. And when the doors were opened just quite wide enough, he scrambled inside and flung himself into my arms, and I just held Hahnemann gently as he was making these wild sounds, just chattering away incoherently. And I looked deeply into his eyes, assuring him that everything was going to be all right. He was safe. I felt such a deep love just rise within me, and I too began to weep, and the remorse I felt for having ignored him was unbearable. I should have never thought of him so uncharitably. I should have never left him out. And as those feelings rose within me, as Hahnemann and I continued to look into each other's eyes, I saw him begin to shift and change as figures in dreams do. His brown eyes gave way to blue. His fur changed into skin, and soft blondish hair framed his face. A bright yellow dress clothed his body. I pulled back in astonishment as I watched Hahnemann completely transformed into my own 2-year-old daughter. I sat stunned as I could suddenly understand every word he was chattering. She breathlessly told me how she thought she would not find me, that she could not catch up with me. She had been so afraid that I would not let her in. She thought she would perish, and I would not care, and I would not see her. I hugged her tightly to me, asking her forgiveness and telling her that I would always see her. I would always love her. And we sat clinging to each other with tears that just would not stop. And the guilt I felt was overwhelming. My mind was numb. How could I have not recognized my own child? Yet she was Hahnemann. How could I have failed to know it was her energy? How could I have been so cold, callous, and uncaring as I had acted towards Hahnemann? After all, he was a creature who deserved love too. He deserved care. How could I forgive myself for such a horrible, terrible feeling and failing? My tears just wouldn't stop. And I woke up. And the moral of the story is, if one were to look with the eyes of oneness, one would never see a stranger anywhere, in any lifetime. When we look at each other with the eyes of oneness, we look with the heart. The heart knows no strangers, for it is a piece of the great Father, Mother, God, Creator itself. To the heart, every being of life is a child of the universe. If we are one with God, then we should consider every person we meet to be our child also. Just as close, just as precious. No matter how we think of others, they are never, ever strangers. They're just part of us, as we are a part of them. We share that common Mother, Father, God, Creator, universe. We share a common heart, the heart of God. See, in the dimension of duality or illusion that causes us to feel separate from each other, we get lost in that. But it's our choice whether or not we embrace oneness. When we look at others with our hearts, seeing them with love and compassion, it's easy to recognize them as the relatives that they truly are. So let us remember to never see anyone in our lives as Hahnemann, but instead see them as our beloveds. You know, John Lennon sang that song, "Imagine the world living as one." I think there's truth in that, because when we experience those moments of absolute oneness with God, we lose ourselves in its light, just white light all around us. When we are one with the universe, we find no barriers that separate us, separate our being with the infinite being. We are the universe. It is us. And these moments of oneness are just deliciously exquisite as we float in a freedom and love that is unparalleled. We're meant to know this place as our true selves. That feeling of oneness is who you really are. It is your true identity. You know, as we live life in these biological magic suits and share experiences with those around us, we're meant to bring that inner identity out, sharing our true selves with each other. We're meant to live our oneness with every breath we take, with every thought, with every word, with every deed. But it takes spiritual practice to return to the oneness, to keep returning to it, to awaken our mystical selves that we're going to talk about in May, that part of us that personally experiences God and knows the divine as me, as you. Give yourself the silence to do that work. Give yourself permission to release your human attachment to separateness and absorb that higher truth of oneness. May we continue to do the work, to be tolerant and kind and empathetic, as we strive to gaze at each other until we can see it in them, until we can see them with our hearts. I think we would make the eternal energy of Ernest Holmes very proud if we seek that good. Because if we can wake ourselves up to oneness and accept our good, we're having a positive impact on the entire world, not just our life, but the entire world. Ernest Holmes says there is no individual good. Good belongs to everyone. Good fulfills itself as it multiplies itself. Therefore, there is no good that belongs to you and me alone. No final piece to us as individuals. The watchword is not exclusion, but inclusion. And the more good we release, the more good we experience. The more good we release, wow, the more love we extend, the greater our level of acceptance of others, the more tolerance we show, the more kindness we express, the more empathy we can experience, the greater our own good life will be. All of that we send out into the web of life, and it will return to us. If we lack connection, this is our calling, to release more good out from us. And finally, I want to close with a poem by a Native American poet, Howard Rainier. And it's called The Ascent. And it says, grab hold and take this hand that reaches out to you. Look up into my eyes. My spirit cries out to you. Friendship is my thought. Let us climb the jagged cliffs of life and fight the ascent of separation together. If I can lift you today, you will look back and grab the hands of 1,000 more. That is the way the Great Spirit would have it. May we each ascend out of our separation into the oneness. And so it is.
So it is.
And so it is.